just for everyone in the room's awareness, we have Yemi online supporting us on the MTP. We have Matt Stitchick, and we have Ben Wygant, who I believe is here on behalf of Steve Rebecco. And we have Bart, sorry, Bart. And we have Emily Weiser and another phone number from the public. Okay. So today we're talking about the project list that will be used to go into the travel demand model. The project list that we're looking at going forward, that will go into the travel demand model to help us craft our draft alternatives for the MTP, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan 2050. I did. And so, as is noted in the memo, basically what we did is we took the project nominations, but nominated projects, so projects from the non-motorized plan or the TIP that maybe didn't make it into the TIP, but that were, recently part of public involvement processes. We compiled all those projects and then we ranked them using the criteria that both the Technical Advisory and Policy Committee approved of, that also went through a public involvement process last year. There were nearly 200 complete streets projects and over 350 non-motorized projects out of those lists. And then the ranking happened, and then we came to you in December, and you all approved the financial analysis for the MTP, and that allowed us to, once we had those projects ranked, we then condense that list into the top ranked projects that fit into the financial analysis that was approved. And so, and again, those projects all got cost estimates as well as part of that ranking process and following the ranking process. And the cost estimates, we worked with the municipality of Anchorage and Alaska Department of Transportation on those cost estimates. So the good news is that given the change that the Technical Advisory and Policy Committees made to the non-motorized allocation for projects, we're looking at over 100 non-motorized projects in our MTP project list that are cost constrained. So that's really exciting. The not as good news is that at least with AMAT's funding for the foreseeable future, there will not be many more complete streets projects funded. There are still about 100 complete streets projects, if you look at that list, that are funded between AMAT's funding, DOT funding, and Municipality of Anchorage funding. So the lists are still about the same number of projects, but I just wanted to highlight, that change that was made to the non-motorized allocation really did make a pretty massive impact. In addition, non-motorized projects tend to cost less than entire road rehabs or reconstructions or something like that. So that's the background. And basically today we're just hoping to get your feedback on these lists, what's in them, if there are projects that aren't programmed that seem like they should be, and if so, how do we move projects around such that we're still staying within that cost constraint that we're required to be for the MTP. So if we add a project, we likely have to take out a project, if that makes sense. But you might notice the complete streets project list has an extra column, and as I mentioned, the complete streets projects are funded from the municipality, from bond funding, from DOT through the STIP and otherwise, and then also from AMAT's funding. And so those are, if we take away an AMAT's project, we add an AMAT's project. If we take away a DOT project, we add a DOT project. So that's why the complete streets project is a little bit, project list is a little bit more, looks on the surface more random in terms of what is programmed and not. It's because of that those three different buckets of funding that are allowing projects to get to go through. Yeah,
Sorry, I'm late.
no worries.
You know, when you call them complete streets project, and just trying to understand the definition, because a lot of our projects, you know, it's maybe a reconstruction, and while we're doing the reconstruction, you know, we are meeting code or complying with the current standards. So therefore it becomes complete street, but it's not just, oh, we're trying to achieve this and, you know, so could you maybe weigh in on how does that differ from just a normal street project that is aging and needs facilities?
Yeah, so this doesn't include pavement preservation projects or simple maintenance projects. So those would be separate. And AMATS has a complete streets policy, so all AMATS funded projects have to be complete streets, have to follow complete streets. And to your point, a lot of our complete streets projects are heavy on the non-motorized aspect because of that element. So
it's really everything else versus
So
maintenance type of projects.
right, so a non-motorized project would be really specifically like just adding a pathway
Okay.
or updating a sidewalk along a section of road or something like that. Whereas a complete streets project would be looking at the whole roadway and considering all users.
Okay.
If that makes
All right.
sense. I can answer any other questions or toss it over to any members to discuss the lists.
One question that I have is, I noticed that some projects are on multiple lists with different dollar amounts. Is that because the project touches different things? And so really, it's a complete project that you add all those numbers together, or like the Muldoon Transit Center is one that I noticed, for example.
So the Muldoon Transit Center is on multiple lists because it's funded from multiple buckets. So it's that is a slightly confusing aspect. The carbon reduction program funding was in our financial analysis
That's
with
the same
bucketed. Nope, that's
Okay.
the CRP.
Okay.
That was bucketed under non-motorized projects. And some of the Muldoon Transit Hub is funded with carbon reduction funding. And then some of it is also funded with the grant, I believe that Transit has, and Bart, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, that's correct. The
Okay.
planning phase is with an FTA grant, and then the carbon reduction is for design and possibly construction.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's why it would show up on both lists, because in order to have these lists reflect our financial analysis, we have to put it in both places, and then certain amounts are within one list and then separate amounts within another. And that would be the same for a couple others. I believe maybe like the under the tip. The Campbell track realignment, I believe, is under.
It's on the first page of non-motorized, number 9, I see.
Yep, and then I believe it's also under complete streets, under tip other. Yes, top of. Line 57. So there are a couple in there just because of the way the funding works out that we have to show on multiple lists. If they have like NMO and then 3 numbers after that, or CSP and 3 numbers after that, those were the projects that came in through nominations. And having worked with these lists since I came on board in August, I'm still going through the lists and finding projects that are overlapping. So there are a few that, like in the list that we published, that I've been going through again, and finding that they're still duplicating elements of projects. And so I'm cleaning those out. And that happened a bunch to create the list that you have in front of you today, and it's still happening. So for example, in the non-motorized list, there were at least 3 projects that were taken out and 3 projects that were added since the list that you got. So line 104, 106, and 107 were all added because of projects that had overlapped. As I'm going through this list one more time. So just again, because of the massive number of projects that came in.
So in some instances, the money overlaps too, and in others.
Right.
It's kind of different pots.
Yep.
So still cleaning that up.
Yep. Yeah, so non-motorized is pretty much one pot, because it's AMATs and MOA, and it's easier to sort of bunch those together, but with the complete streets, they stay as.
And what's the red numbers on some of the projects?
Yeah, great question. The red numbers are cost estimates that are above the cost estimating tools bounds. So we don't know for sure if that's actually what the cost estimate would be because it's such a massive project. It exceeds the capability of the calculator that we're using. So that's why, for the most part, those ones are not included.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they're mostly very expensive ones.
Right. But often they are, as we were just discussing, they are, elements of them are included in other projects.
Chelsea, are they sorted by prioritization already? So like
Yep, so
line 1, 2, 3.
So at the top, if you look at the MTP number, the first few on the non-motorized list all come from the tip. So 1 through 14 on the non-motorized list come from the tip. And then almost 1 through like 50 or so on the complete streets projects come from the tip. Yeah, 1 through 57. Lines 1 through 57 on the complete streets project are already programmed in the short term. And then after that, you can see on the right side, you'll have a score. And so that score came from our ranking process that we went through.
When you say the right side, which, when you say.
That's
right.
So the far right side, under the date, there's the column for score.
So,
So if they're in the tip, they didn't get scored because they're already programmed.
Uh-huh.
these are not.
Oh.
Everything in the tips included.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks.
So, for example, line 58, 36th Avenue, it says programmed. What is it programmed in right now?
Line 38 for which list?
Complete streets, 58, sorry, 58. It's right after the tip.
So that would be programmed under municipality of Anchorage.
Okay, so,
In terms of our financial analysis.
okay,
The program means that we're including it, quote unquote, in the MTP
Correct.
as part of the financial constraint.
But then, for example, taking this list and turning it into what the contractor needs in order to put into the travel demand model, they're asking for like when this project is going to be completed. All I'm putting in that column is after 2026. So sometime between 2026 and 2050 in theory.
Because in their tool, in their modeling tool, they can, if they have a year, then they can look at like intermediate years and that.
Yeah, we'll see if that's acceptable to them. But that's all
Otherwise,
I know.
if you don't give them a date, then it's just the furthest out, is it a 2050, right? Then that's kind of what they're just assuming everything will be by then.
Yeah, maybe Ben can speak to that if I'm stating any of that incorrectly, but that's my understanding.
We talk about that line item 58 on 36th Avenue.
Mhm.
Did DOT do some upgrades to 36th Avenue, just like in the last 10 years? Non-motorized facilities, or was that an AMAS project? I seem to recall there was some improvements made, and I'm just wondering,
I think there was a section done.
yeah.
We,
for-
the
Like-
4-lane section. And down by,
Arctic to like Old Seward Highway or.
that's only, that's a short.
Oh, that's just a short segment. Like, for instance, when it says MOA and it's programmed, you know, like, cause I did work on some of 36th Avenue on it. I don't know if it was that segment or not, that was included in the Denali we include both. It was a very expansive DSR. You know, Denali all the way from Fireweed to Tudor, and then we looked at 36th Avenue from New Seward Highway to, gosh, I don't remember the western extent. So I'm not sure, is that, when you're saying programmed, is that what's come out of that
Isn't it C to
DSR?
B?
She just means that it's gonna be included in the MTP, because fiscally constrained project.
Yep, it doesn't mean that it's, I mean,
So
It's not currently in our CI. I
it
don't know.
might be good to change that.
we
Only
can change the
program,
language, but
programmed being currently actually programmed to, funding's available. Versus I think what you're
something
using,
available maybe.
what
Yeah,
you're
'cause I had
using here.
I had a similar question, and even in the Complete Streets list, you say, I was a little, somewhat confused when you say program, and you say it's in the 23-26 tip. On the first page, project 1 through 14, you have well over $150 million. You say program, to me, that means you have a project funded. And I don't think AMS is going to spend $150 million in the 23-26 tip. You don't get that much money. On
Which number?
Complete Streets.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So the cost estimate comes from the tip, but that's not, and that's, the total project cost.
So I
Which
get
would
the, I
be
get the
listed in
estimate,
the
I'm focused more on the program.
Right, so we don't,
Programmed in the tip.
it is in terms of the entire cost estimate is in the tip. And that's where we're getting our numbers from, because we have to cost estimates for projects. But the only, if you look at our financial analysis, there's a short-term section, which be just the funding that's programmed in the tip. And then the funding that we anticipate will be programmed from 2027 to 2050.
Yeah, the 4 years of the tip are constrained, and then we'll say estimated costs after 2026, and it may be another 20 million to actually construct it, but that's programmed in the tip. This just shows the total project. I mean, the amount that's in the 23 to 26 tip for Fireweed is not 50. It's
So
not where it is, but it's
So-
after that shows some of that construction costs.
as I was looking at this, I think the programmed, way I was reading it is, if it says programmed on this list, it means that it's included in the fiscally constrained MTP. Not that it's been programmed in the TIF, not that it's been programmed anywhere else, just that it's kind of fiscally constrained MTP versus there's like illustrative, those that are not programmings, that they're shown here because they're identified, but they're not assumed in the MTP.
And
But-
if it, yeah.
But I think what we're saying is it'll be good to actually change that and only maybe say programmed if it's actually in the tip,
Yeah,
money's identified, and otherwise you can just call it, something that says it's fiscally constrained MTP.
sure.
Versus-
Yeah, I'm open to the best language for that. I hesitate to add additional columns or line items because I think that adds confusion. But I'm definitely open to, we could say programmed, including long-term costs or something like that.
Well,
Yeah.
that column is not gonna be included in the final MTP. That is just for this group.
Yeah.
To see which projects we're recommending being included in. So after we're done here and move forward with the MTP, we're gonna be narrowing down this information you see here to just what's included, which is project name, description, cost estimate. And then if it's short-term, long-term, however. we want it.
So in the case if it says programmed here, that's basically, this is what will be in the MTP list.
Yes,
So,
it's a quick way. We could have said, is it included in MTP? Yes or no? Okay, well, we could have done that a little easier for you guys to understand. But if it's programmed, that's what we're anticipating moving forward as a project for the 2050 MTP.
when it comes before the TAC and the policy committee, is it still gonna look like this with the column?
So at this point, we are open to discussion, but we would love to have sort of consensus today, if at all possible, given the time frame that we have for the MTP. And then we would anticipate you would see this as part of the whole draft MTP. And then it would look like what Aaron just described, if that makes sense. But
I like the idea, and it'd be really simple just to change that column to say included fiscally constrained MTP, and then it says yes. Change everything that says program to a yes and not program to a no.
and I guess what I'm saying, I don't anticipate bringing this list back to you until it's part of the full draft document. And so that column wouldn't even need to be included.
Got it. Okay.
It would just be the projects
was just
that say
for today.
program.
Does that make sense, Todd?
It's still like back onto like training wheels here. Sorry, guys, but so if I have a project that's going to be funded solely by bonds and not with federal dollars, would it be on this list also? And so also that's the MOA bond funding, meaning bond. So like back to my 36.
Yeah, so that would have to get funded by bonds in order for that project to move forward.
Okay. Okay. And so what's the goal of this fiscally constrained list? It's just to say,
The
this is all the
MTPs
needs?
The
and
MTP
this
is
our-
required to be fiscally constrained. MTP is also required to go through a public involvement process.
Mhm.
And so the public involvement process includes solicitations for projects from the community, similar to the CIP process. And so we're just kind of pulling those two things together. So we got the projects, we ranked them based on, criteria that we also got public involvement and committee response to. And then we had to basically take away the projects that didn't have impact financial.
I think a way to see it from TM&E's
Mhm.
perspective is, this is like big picture, right? This is like everything that we think would be needed and beneficial and could be funded in acreage. And then the tip kind of draws from this. So I think on your end, Melinda, you should look to see, is everything that you want to do or that are planning to do at TM&E on this list?
Like including our CIP program, like it captures all of that as well.
Well, please double check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that you are, when you're doing something, you can be like, it's in the long range plan, right? It shouldn't miss anything that you're doing or wanting to do.
I was like, I should have had Gary here, sorry, but yeah, because he's the one that really knows our
Has he been
goal.
involved in this? So,
He should be
It
though,
was part of the
because
scoring and ranking.
Yeah.
he's our
Yeah.
CIP
yeah, he's supposed to be involved in
coordinator.
this story.
Yes. Okay, so he's touched this.
Steve or Buffalo has a hand up here.
Oh, hi, thanks. During the public comment period, the port submitted a couple of projects we wanted included here. And I don't know if what we're looking at now is the here where they went, or is it on some other list?
I think that was the public comment period for the tip, amendment number 1. So that would be on that list. Not necessarily this one, but we could,
I think those projects were not included because they weren't specifically,
nominated during this process for the MTP.
but also if they're in the tip, they should be in here, except that they're not
They're not in
under
the tip right now.
any of the funding.
I mean, they're not officially in the tip yet.
Okay.
Still has to go through approval before they're added in. So they're not in the current tip. We just got those comments in.
Okay,
So we can
Yeah,
discuss how to put them in if needed.
yeah,
What list-
as I was gonna say, and as I've warned you, this is new territory for us. We've usually, participated as spectators and supporters of what most folks think makes the most sense. But we have a little skin in the game now, and I just gonna need a little hand holding for for when I need to do more speaking up.
And Steve, just for your awareness, we will include language about the port in the document itself. Whether or not they're called out as specific projects, we do intend to include that so that it is a document that you can point to say, and the port is included in the MTP to that extent.
I appreciate that, Chelsea. Thanks.
So Aaron, on these downtown signal and lighting projects, they ended up in the complete street list, which ultimately I agree with, you know, what's driving those projects is to replace the aging infrastructure. But to do the project, we end up touching every surface in the corridor, so.
I mean, they're a significantly large project.
Yeah.
They're in the roadway table.
Mhm.
So that's why they were included in the complete street.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, we do replace sidewalks, curb and gutter, you know, asphalt, all striping, signs, everything. So the fact that it's in complete street seems a little weird, but that is the scope, so I would agree with that.
On that note, and perhaps I already said it, but there, if there are substantial complete streets projects that didn't make the list, another way to think about it could be that you could take the non-motorized aspects and put them in the non-motorized list. If you wanted to move projects around and make money work in different ways, that would be one way to add in more projects because there are so many non-motorized projects included. That could just be another option if that's needed.
Which list was the bigger list?
The non-motorized list,
Oh, it's the bigger one.
I mean,
Oh,
they're approximately the same, but in terms of projects that would be looking to the future that aren't already in the TIP, the non-motorized list has.
So let's understand exactly what we're looking at here. At previous MTPs, we'd have the first 10 years, the second 10 years of short-term, long-term, and then illustrative. Knowing that illustrative were not funded. They're there, we think they're a good project, but they're out there in the long range. So if I look at all three of them are theoretically the same, but we have transit, we have program, and then we have a bunch of not programmed. So same sort of thing with non-motorized, there's 200 and some odd projects, 270. We're not planning on having all of those in the list.
Nope.
There's gonna be this one we can fit in the short term, one in the long term, and then we're not gonna have 20 pages of illustrative, right?
No, we're not planning to include any illustrative this
Okay.
round. So the MTP is updated every 4 years.
Okay.
In theory, illustrative projects, if they really are at a higher ranking, they can come back in
Yeah.
4 years. But if they're ending up on what would be an illustrative list, they are likely not going to be completed in the next 4 years. So
I just don't want to include light rail, commuter rail, et cetera, in an MTP and give people the mistaken impression that that's viable in the next 20 years.
nope, it's not.
It is not.
Is,
Maybe 50 years from now, but not 20 years from now.
so, but will this kind of work be in an appendix? But it kind of, you can clearly see the process of what's included and not included. Versus, not shown in the MTP as illustrative list, but kind of documentation of the process, like how will that?
They'll be provided on the AMAT's website in posterity as part of the work session documents. But I don't know that they would necessarily be included as a.
Okay, so it's not gonna be part of the document, but the documentation is so that everybody can sign.
And the map that a lot of these projects came from as public involvement comments, that's still available. Maybe that map would be included in some way.
And the future MTPs, you can tap into this because you'll have it, so you don't
Absolutely.
have to like recreate all this.
Right.
but that did answer my question, what is the frequency of the update? Because like our CIP, we review it every year.
Right.
And so then it's always being refined and it's a live program.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's 4 years.
Yeah.
What's gonna be the most helpful thing for us to do on this? Like, talk about what's included versus not included?
I think the most helpful thing would be if there are projects that are not included that you want to see included. We should talk about those and
Let's see.
Have a dance party,
yeah,
have a dance off.
and then what we want, what give and take do we want to do in order to make their.
Line 48. Just zero. Uh,
How did you construction?
$830 What are we in programming? What, are you trying to program just a phase of that or?
So that one, all that we're including in the project list is what is within the AMAT's boundary.
Okay.
So that is my estimate based on what's in the tip,
Yeah.
or excuse me, what's in this. Yes, what's in the tip. And then, you know, proportioning out the amount of that into the AMAT's boundary. Otherwise, we were looking at the DOT cost constraint and it was $1 billion over. So there would be no other FEMA or no other DOT projects funded. If that went, because it is, like you said, it's, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. And that would basically eat away all of DOT's allocation in the MTP until 2050 and more.
As it will DOT's budget.
Oh, that.
Right.
Yeah. Also, sorry.
Yeah.
It's on broad, I stay line 48.
Yep.
Please take off 4-lane highway.
Maybe they're doing the same thing. Absolutely.
Circumvent the environmental process to predetermine what we're gonna do there.
Okay, I think that description was either pulled from the tip or was likely pulled from the tip. So maybe that needs to be an update to the tip as well.
We can get you a better scope.
Okay, or I can double check what was in the tip. Some of those DOT projects in the tip did not reflect what was in the tip, which I thought was interesting. So I can double check that.
But for DOT, I'm seeing that HSIP project for Industry Way, Old Stewart and 120th. I'm glad to see that's in there. That is on the complete
44.
streets, number 44. The project that I'm working on that's going to tie into our 120th Avenue upgrade. That's cool. It's like, oh, this is kind of fun. Just didn't come very prepared, but now that I'm looking through it, I'm like, oh, great. That's needed.
Yeah, and Melinda, if it would be helpful for us to meet as a follow-up.
Okay. Okay.
So as I was looking through this, one of the things that caught my eye was item 80, line 80 Complete Streets. Gamble Street, 3rd to 15th.
Mhm.
And knowing that the Stewart to Glen PEL is currently being worked on, it made me just wonder. It seemed like they had sent out an email saying there was gonna be a discussion about project, and then that got like postponed, so I'm not sure exactly what's in there. But if that comes out, like, how do we, and they have identified doing something, say, to Gamble, like this. Freeland Boulevard idea. Like, how does this interplay with projects that are out? I mean, if that makes sense, what I'm asking.
Yep, so my understanding, and Aaron, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, is that anything that goes into the tip is supposed to be based on the MTP. So in theory, when the MTP is updated in 4 years, after that report comes out, it would then likely be included because it would be coming from another planning document and additional public.
Okay. So it could be included in the tip because it's from another planning document and then updated with the MTP.
Depends on when it's updated.
Okay.
Because it would have to, if it's AMAX funded, it would have to go through the AMAX process to be included in the tip. And what we're basically saying is we're not gonna have any funding available for the next 20+ years for new projects above and beyond what we already showed. Unless something changes. It's all that, yeah.
But if it's DOT funded, that's their list. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
this one-
I'm a little concerned about that. I don't know where that project came from. It's not a DOT.
It came from the public involvement from the interactive map. It was a comment. But it's not programmed right now. So it wouldn't be included in the MTP.
And it lists DOT because it's their
Yeah.
facility, and so that's where the
Correct.
funding would come from if they were supported.
Yes, and that's the best we can do.
And to your point too, with the Pell going on in that area, I know that working session did get we're working on rescheduling and hopefully get a lot more notice to folks because there was good attendance at that meeting. But yeah, since this wouldn't be in storage, I think we should have a better idea.
At what point is this gonna be finalized as far as like the project list?
So we would, we would love to get it as close to complete today as possible so that we can pass it off to RSG so that they can put it in model and create some draft alternatives for us.
Okay,
And then it will come back as part of the complete draft MTP. So there is additional opportunity to provide, comment on this, but if we can get it as close to what we want it to be today or in the next couple days, so that we can get them working on the alternatives, that would be great.
okay. So this work session, it's not preparing something that's gonna come before the TAC and the policy committee. It's more getting it together to send it to the consultant.
That,
And at that point, then things will come.
that would be ideal from our perspective. We are open to fill the committees, if they want otherwise, but it will hang up the process as we're going forward.
So if let's say this is 90% there, right? And when it comes back to us, we look at it and we're like, we know some new things. Now we've had a process time to digest. Will there be opportunity to make some of those adjustments to the model, or is that gonna be really hard on the timeline?
Yes, if I am remembering correctly, at this point, what we're hoping to do going forward is take this list, go forward with the travel demand model to draft the alternatives, and also draft the entire MTP document, and then bring everything through public involvement, and then respond to comments, and then bring it all to you all for any additional changes. And then if I'm remembering the schedule correctly, there would be opportunity to make adjustments to small adjustments to the travel demand model, or it is entirely finalized. So yes, if we can get it 90% and folks are good with that, for us to move forward, that would be perfect.
It's a good question about non-motorized project 54. It's 15th Avenue, Matoush, and Orca, non-motorized overcrossing. It says program. I'm just curious where that's programmed.
Program in the MTP. I think the wording programmed has fouled people up, but it is what we're anticipating including in this project list.
So it's not in the CIP. It's not in the.
No,
tip
you
already.
have to look at the source document to see, and then it just says it's from Fairview, so it was
Yeah.
one of the nominated projects. It's not actually in anything like the CIP.
Okay, so it's a project that was nominated. and
That scored
right
high
now
enough.
You're considering including it. Okay.
Yeah.
Line 54 on the authorized list.
Seems a little low. What's the going rate for overcrossings are pretty high.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because I
But then
just,
the, the Camel Creek one is at 13, which also seems a little low, but that's what we have.
I took a wag at the other one that I just nominated, and I came up with like 9 million, so I was like, oh, that seems kind of high, but now that I'm looking at it, I realize, oh, maybe
I'm not an economist, not lately, so I'm not an.
maybe I'm close, I don't know.
I saw the one that you sent and it looked like if it was covered versus uncovered, it makes a difference from the
And I was showing uncovered.
cost standpoint.
Should it be changed? This is the opportunity to provide feedback on that as well.
The expert.
The big thing is, as Chelsea mentioned, we use cost estimating tools that were provided to us by municipality bank rates from Department of Transportation.
yeah.
So it's the best guess we can get at this point, because it is a planning level estimate.
True.
Yeah.
True.
You know,
Right.
as we get into the design in the future, it'll come into a more focused amount. So
Yeah.
I think that's in the ballpark of what your estimate was, so.
Yeah, that's why I was like, okay,
And
close.
And just for context, there was, when the project team met to review this list before we brought it to you all, there was like a $30 million project that was under programmed on the non-motorized list, which the project team was like, that doesn't seem to make sense when you're looking at the cost estimate for non-motorized projects, and they tend to range in the like, for the most part, the $1 million range. So if we took out that $30 million project and we were able to add, 15 more projects in there. So just take that in context with $10 million or the difference in costs around there. And I think the $30 million also happened to line up with line number 53 at A Street. I think it was, there was an overlap there, so we were able to find sort of efficiencies.
Non-motorized project 82, can you remind me again what a box signal is? I forget what those are.
It's flashing,
What's that?
like you press the button and it does the flashing,
Oh, okay.
right?
The hawk signal
Or not,
is, it looks like kind of like a doghouse, where it's got like, it has only 3 lights, like 3 different lights, and it isn't just black when it's not triggered. When you trigger it, it like flashes, which means slow down, and then it turns red, which means like stop. So it's like a pedestrian crossing beacon, one of the types. And I was looking at that. We don't have any hawks in Anchorage. We have had discussions about that, and our intent as we run the signal system is to have consistency. So would it be a hawk versus a pedestrian signal? I mean, there's different ways to do it. So hawk is fairly specific versus just, you could say something like a pedestrian beacon or pedestrian signal.
Would you prefer it to be replaced?
And then at the time that the project then goes forward, we can determine if the hawk is the better option. So,
Should we replace that?
yeah, let's change
Okay.
that from specific identified hawk.
Great.
You could say pedestrian signal or beacon.
I asked how that was nominated. Was it nominated?
It was nominated as a hawk signal from the.
It looks like it was a comment map that someone was like, hey, do a hawk.
Yes, but it probably would have been quite the same.
So what's the feedback to the community?
I think the feedback is that having the intent of a hawk is to allow for pedestrians to cross and have some signal treatment. And so, whether it's a hawk or a pedestrian hybrid beacon or pedestrian signal, there's lots of different ways to do that same thing.
Since it's nominated as being specific.
Or maybe that's what somebody understood a pedestrian signal to be. I mean, I think any of these projects would go through the engineering, the design process and the engineering process, and engineers would be required to do, you know, stay within the bounds of their code and licensing too.
So a hawk is so specific.
Yeah.
I imagine that the scoring at this level in MTP, you know, we're not providing like engineering detail, right? This is how we're gonna do all these things. These are more general concepts, and so to get as specific with something that's new.
So can I use like a less specific example?
Sure.
When the South Addition Community Council nominated the ANC Complete Streets project, the way that we nominated it was as a reconstruction. And now we have it on the tip as a study. And I think there's some confusion about, you know, community members, even people who are like pretty dialed into the process and pretty savvy with some of this stuff, that they nominate these big things and maybe they aren't realistic and there's reasons for that, haven't been modeled, whatever. There's not necessarily like round two to nominate it, you know, where they have the feedback and they say, okay, well, then we'd like to just nominate a study. We didn't realize that this wasn't a realistic ask. And so maybe that's just speaking more broadly to AMAS processes in general, to be able to give that feedback and say, hey, we got your project nominated, but would you be able to do this? That I have been on maybe the other side of that conversation and sensed frustration with folks that I worked with.
I think something that we have to keep in mind is that AMAS is a planning entity. We're not, notwithstanding some of the folks in the room, we're not engineers, we're not designers, we're not architects, we're planners, but this is a planning entity. So I think it makes sense to say project should add some sort of signal, some pedestrian signal at that location, not necessarily saying this should be a hawk signal, because when the engineers get to the point where they're designing that thing and they're looking at what it actually needs, they should be allowed the freedom to come up with the best possible engineering solution for that. And it may be a hawk signal. It may be something else. It may be like what we have at, you know, across near East High School on Northern Lights. I don't know what it is because I'm not an expert in that area, but I don't think we should just say this is what they nominated, so that's what we have to put in.
Well,
Maybe give them a little flexibility for the professional engineers and designers to look at that and see what's the best solution and let them have at it, because we are a planning entity.
That's a good point, because when you're developing a project description, which is not scope, the engineers will use your project description to develop a scope. You zero in on a specific item, you eliminate flexibility to even look at other alternatives. You say, I want, the project says build this, and you're like, okay, that's what we're building, and you don't even look at other alternatives.
Yeah,
And then the scope has very limited ability to go back and say, well, we want to look at something else. It's like, no, the project description said this. You're tied to that specific entity.
An example of that is Bernard project, Minnesota Defense, and it specifically said, you know, you're not going to touch the intersection of
Yeah.
Minnesota and Bernard. And so it had to go through like a bigger process to actually get that removed from the project description so that the team could look at taking out a travel lane and making a pedestrian friendly and all those sorts of things that that project is now doing. It's taking out a receiving lane at that intersection, affecting the intersection in a way that is enabling pedestrian and bicycle and other features because it had specifically had detailed language in the list. It made it so that it required a more substantial process to make those changes. So typically it's better to not like get into those details. And I don't think.
I can partially understand the rationale, but I can also see where you have things like, you know, potentially just as a hypothetical, because we've been talking a lot about what is a protected bike lane, really. And so we had a community council come forward and maybe we want a protected bike lane, separated bike lane. And at some point, I think we should have as part of our policy committee agenda, a discussion on what we're talking about, what our vocabulary is, and talking about specific types of bike lanes. But, you know, if they nominate a bike lane and that just ends up being Sharrow's thing on the ground, well, then that's really kind of not what they were asking for. What they could have been asking for was more aspirational. So it's just, I think.
Yeah,
it's
I think
interesting.
in this specific instance, to take that example, the change that I'm suggesting from changing hawk to pedestrian signal or beacon would be akin to basically, instead of saying protected bike lane with planter strip and bollards, it would be just protected bike lane. Let's figure out what type of protected bike, how we're protecting it. If we changed it to crossing enhancements, that's like you know, just crossing enhancements, it's okay. It's like taking it and no longer protected bike lane, it's like some bicycle facility. I'm not trying to downgrade it, if that makes sense. I'm trying to just not specify how it's gonna impact. Does that make sense? Yep. So, because it does happen in the traffic that people ask us for things because they're trying to be helpful and find a solution. And often, first thing I try to find out is what is it what problem you're trying to solve, and that's find a solution that fits that. And typically, it's not the specific thing you're asking for.
I think that's a really good point, because I think if you look at this, I mean, the federal overseers always look at things like this and say, okay, so what's the situation there? And the problem is, someone is asking, they have a very specific request, but the reality is, the problem is they're asking for you to look at non-motorized crossings at Boniface and Sixth Avenue. So here's the problem. Don't come up with a solution. Don't prejudge what it's going to be.
Yeah.
The right solution, again, might be a hawk signal. It might be something else.
Yeah.
Let's not predetermine it. Let's say, hey, let's do something there and figure out what the best solution is to solve the pedestrian safety issue at that location.
Focus on the intent.
I don't want to downgrade it to
Yeah.
just a crossing. I want to keep it at the same level as a hawk, which is pedestrian crossing, signal or beacon. That's kind of same level of treatment, just there's different ways to do it.
I'd like to talk about two complete street projects that include protected bike lanes. So there's one on number 61, line item 61. And then the other one is Arctic, so 65. So kind of comparing between 61 and 65. So 61, you know, it's talking about going from it's a road diet to get more bike lanes and non-motorized facilities. I'm like, I think that would be a good planning effort, and that's, you know, it's interesting. I don't know any background history, but I'm seeing MOA and $11 million. Okay, that one seems like, all right, I could see that one. But now when I'm looking at this other one on, what did I say, 65 Arctic Complete Street, item 65, all the way from 16th Avenue to Diamond, kind of looking at, again, the complement of the complete streets and consider bike lanes, 68 million. You know, the only thing that jumps out at me is MOA and PME. We've tackled a lot of Arctic already. We've spent a considerable amount of our CIP dollars and resources in addressing some of that. So I don't know, I'm a little uncomfortable about the 68 million and having that as a prioritized project, when I know there's so many other items that need to get addressed, and for the dollar amount, I'm just having a hard time digesting that. I don't know what else to say except for it stands out to me.
And I would just say that in terms of looking at the cost estimates alone, the difference in cost estimate is really the difference in like.
Holy mackerel, I don't know. I mean, again, is this, what was the word, not inspirational, but aspirational?
Yeah.
I don't know where it belongs, but to me, I'm like, all right, since my time frame with MOA, they've started at, different sections of Arctic. I think we've gotten some enhancements for bike lanes, maybe not the best. We've got some pathways going on, but I don't know. So if I could just view this differently from a plan effort, maybe it wouldn't get me too excited. I'm not sure how to get feedback from that standpoint. Is that something
I mean, I guess my
people
suggestion,
really want, or?
is that if there's something that's on the not programmed that you think would,
Could
Fit
flip into
better?
that place?
I mean, because, yeah, there's been work on Arctic is it, you know, going into traffic common road diet, to bike lanes.
I guess the $68 million price tag is. Wow, how would we get there?
3 years of worth.
How would we get there?
Probably.
Yeah, we just right now, we'd love to have a bond, program back to 60 million, but we're really
I mean, I guess
moving
the way,
around to the 30 million these days.
So I will also say that this is our 2050 list.
Okay,
So we're looking at including projects that in theory could get completed before 2050. Does that seem like, towards the bottom of the MOA list, does that seem like a project that might get done before 2050? And if not,
or maybe even change the limits. I feel like, gosh, what did we just chunk off? We got all the way to Tudor, maybe we start from Tudor to Diamond,
Tutor, it's basically done.
right? I mean, like, we've already invested a lot in
I
that.
mean, it's only like a couple of years old.
There's only so much we can do with it. I mean, we've got all the merge left, merge right. Everybody's figured it out and not everybody likes it, but for us to go back and reconsider changing it, I just can't see that happening with a lot of momentum, given all the other needs.
Other more pressing needs.
Right, so
Redoing
maybe
section.
if we were to just at least focus it down to, what did we just complete lastly was Tudor, so go Tudor to Diamond. I mean, that would be my suggested change. And maybe that would reduce that down to 30 million. I don't know. Maybe not even that. Maybe 20 million. Okay, anyways, one of my ideas. I saw a box that was empty on 57. It was APU. I wasn't sure if there was, if that's just something to come.
there's no additional description on the tip.
Oh.
That's it.
I guess what also kind of makes me wonder is, there's that DOT AMATS project that we've been working on that has lots and lots of history, and I don't know where that's really going. That has anything to do with that.
Is that what that is?
Is that what it is?
That's that here.
That's what it is.
All right.
It's the SEU program.
It's like, and that's why it's kind of a blank box, and everybody's still scratching their
Well,
head.
because the only description in the tip is what you see in the project name.
Hmm. I guess you could make a little bit more description of extension of, is it
Well, those-
University Drive,
Those areas have a description.
right?
So what we would need
Extension.
to do is we take these directly from the tip. So if we want it changed, we need to change in the tip. And we're in the middle of a tip amendment right now. So if we need that description changed, I'll need to get that info from whoever.
Well, would that,
provide
that would be just, like, that would be, what do we call
Well, I mean, tip
Yes.
descriptions, you gotta be careful with tip descriptions. People get very finicky over it. And so if we could do it as part of an amendment,
It's been there for
it's
18
underway,
years.
yeah. We definition.
Well, I could get you this, I just seen the PDA go across my desk this morning, so, it's moving. It's on the, project on tonight.
so one question that I have, as I look at the Arctic and thinking more about it, it does talk about protected bike lanes, and it looks like probably, to get a protected bike lane, you're kind of dropping a full lane into that one direction. And I do know that there's interest in protected bike lanes. My question is still trying to figure out like where,
Where is it gonna fit?
because in some ways,
It's squeezed to the
And
max.
to some degree, I mean, the travel demand model can help us to like recognize which facilities might be able to accommodate the shift in traffic that giving up lane travel would result from a bike lane sort of situation. So not having a top of the man model yet, it's a little bit hard for me necessarily to be like, yes, this is the better location if we're gonna do it, you know? So, what you think?
That's a good point, Brad. I was just thinking about that as well. Looking at all these projects and I'm wondering how much of this is gonna be modeled. Because as I'm looking through here, it's good to have options. You have, removing lanes on many streets and putting in protected bike lanes, which is fine, where they're needed. I said, but look at all these projects. I mean, where's that traffic going? I mean, if I look through here, you're removing lanes, probably 10 different lanes already through here. And that traffic has to go somewhere. So I'm just curious to the model, how much is.
And I guess the approach that it looks like from this is, let's assume it kind of everywhere, and if there's gonna be like abundance of congestion in some places, do we then back out a little bit at that point when it comes through, or do we? I mean, because I think it makes sense to try to do something, because we haven't done anything, so I guess my tendency would be to err on the side of including more permitted bike lanes, and then if it breaks the model, then we can see that. We won't even try it, and we won't even know. That makes sense.
I think that this, so if these are community Anchorage resident nominated projects, I think it reveals a desire to shift a pendulum the other way. And I think it speaks to our lack of protected bike lanes, the fact that folks are asking for road diets and protected bike lanes. We don't have those things here, which is why some of these nominations speak to that. That is a desire for quality of life here in Anchorage. This one on 65 says, consider protected bike lanes. So that to me is kind of squishy. Whereas on this 15th Avenue, complete street and north-south crossing, that says, and add speed reduction, protected bike lanes. And I'm just looking at probably who I think maybe might nominate that. That is a very specific desire. I think that kind of gets back to, I get this is all planning and things can evolve, but I just hear from my constituents that maybe we really want to see more of these things in Anchorage. So it should be modeled. But I do think that why you see so many of those type of nominations, because we like those things.
I just also want to remind everyone that we have a vision eval portion of this as well, that's talking about how can we help to address some of these congestion issues through things other than roadway expansion. And so you got to remember that although we model almost all of the complete street projects, things like transit marketing and stuff can't be modeled, but the actual modelable one will be in there. So if it's a change to a road network, like a removal of a lane, adding a lane, something, that'll be modeled. And we'll see the impact on the network. But what we've been trying to do with this MTP is kind of shift away from this old school thinking of level of service. Congestion dictates everything. Because not only has FHWA started moving away from that, but the community has asked that we start moving away from that, and we look at more things than just that. So try and keep in mind that we have a lot we need to look at as AMATs, that we're federally required to look at as AMATs, as we go forward. And it'll be modeled, you'll be able to see it, and then we can kind of go from there.
And then again, sort of the committee's determination to increase the allocation to non-motorized. But then also the vision eval sort of scenarios emphasized a lot of that as well. So I think those are all kind of coming together with this.
And the fact that every 4 years it's updated. And so, I mean, this is an area that I feel like we do need to start to dabble in, try something out and figure out how it works. And so I guess that's,
Question on the modeling. So is that modeling all the programmed projects as constructed or modeling all the proposed projects?
If it's not programmed, it wouldn't be included in.
So we would get a snapshot of part of a partial list of these and see what that does to.
And by programs, do you mean what they listed here as program, or do you mean,
That's what I mean.
what did you mean? when
Well,
you
that's
said
my
program?
question. Yeah.
Okay,
So anything that says program in the column, funding program, would be included in the model as constructed. Anything that says not program. Not be excluded.
Correct.
Apologies, that's language, is it code?
what are the scenarios that are gonna be analyzed in your model? Are they gonna analyze just 2050, or is there a mid-year analysis? Yeah.
Don't believe there is a mid-year analysis.
It doesn't.
Because the problem is we don't have a mid-year anymore.
Okay.
We really have the short term, that's the 4 years of the TIP and 1 year of the STIP, 1 year of the CIP, not even the CIP. But, and then everything after that is outer years. And so we don't know when a project is gonna be constructed, really. And so we just have to see what does it look like by 2050 and see if we're okay with how the network is at that point. Because we'll be using, and it's not just the graphics, it'll be like, what does our VMT look like? Are we okay with that level? What is our VHD or other things like that? You know, those statistics that we pull out of the model to provide that information for everyone to look at and see if that's the direction we want to head.
So the modeling will look at road diets.
So
Assess the whole network to see.
yes, one of the things we did for the MTP this go around that was really cool is added in more calibration for non-motorized projects. So we'll be able to see the impacts those have on the network a little. And roadway projects will be kind of the bigger impacts. So if you take away a lane, what does that do for the system? For example, the 2040, we modeled removing a lane on Northern Boulevard from Seward to Minnesota. And we showed that it didn't negatively impact the network. However, Jim Amundsen said he didn't believe our model. So there's always the factor that some people don't believe what our model says. It's our best guess. And you have to recognize it's a regional model. So if you want to get into the micro simulation to see what it'll actually have on the network, that's kind of the more fine-tuned thing that happens later when you get into studies or other things like that.
Our best tool we have.
Best we have.
Yeah.
And, sorry to repeat, we're trying to not only rely on just the model, because the model tells us only one thing. You know, as had been mentioned, these are concerns that the community has raised, so that should be another piece. What are our goals and objectives say? That should be another piece. What are we federally required to do? That is, you know, another piece we have to think about. What is our fiscal constraint? You know, what is the will of the policy committee, the direction they've given us, which they've already said, we want more non-motorized. Our goals and objectives need to focus on more equity. What can we do for transit? That kind of stuff. So,
And like Brad's pointed out, we've learned a lot from the big snowfall and the berms and the reduced lanes and, you know, the courtesy has come about, oh, after you, no, okay, I mean, you get there. You may not get there 2 minutes, maybe 2 minutes slower. So be it, yeah, so.
it was a very interesting experiment to see what it was like with lane reductions on roads throughout the town.
Right.
And I heard
You survived.
positive feedback. Not the fact that the sidewalks were completely covered and unusable and people were walking on the road. But,
Yeah.
you know,
There was a silver lining.
it's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah,
A gray,
yeah.
slushy,
Yeah.
dirty silver.
Oh,
As you approach an intersection and get on Tudor and C, go, whoa.
Yeah, there were some that were
Have
Yeah.
those to clean up.
struggle more than others. So here's another one that I was looking and saw, the item 102 of the non-motorized list. Where it talks about wayfinding. So yeah, project project funding for wayfinding signage throughout AMAS area. So to be able to do that effectively, I feel like we need a plan so that it can be more comprehensive, consistent. And so I'm curious if, would we just change the project description to to include a planning study or like, a planning document or something that like talks to that, or where would that fall?
Believe you could update the language. We have generally kept plans as separate items throughout. So it may need to be a separate line item.
Is there a place for plans now that I guess you mentioned that? Because we've got a few different like AC streets study, like,
So for the most part, plans are under complete streets. And again, this gets back to sort of that initial where you were noticing projects in multiple lists. Plans are, that's where the funding comes from. So that's why they're listed under the complete streets project. There are a couple on the non-motorized list. And we may need to talk about those being different.
One seems to be very unpaid and soft, so if it fails, I don't know.
that just says including.
I think in just terms of where the funding is coming from, plans in general are listed under the complete streets project list because that's how the funding works out, because it's saying that's funding and it's,
And I think this one particularly, the Parks and Rec is doing a lot of wayfinding. And so I think that when I see that including trail users, that's, in my mind, there's been lots of discussion about both, what do we do on trails and what do we do on streets? And so on bike lanes, protected bike lanes, kind of all of those, how do we direct pedestrian, what do you do downtown?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about that in Mayor's Project Anchorage Task Force, which was kind of inspired by the Roger Brooks presentation, wayfinding, and there was an idea discussing like wayfinding.
Yeah, so the Moose Loop is both on street, on trail, and so, along the Moose Loop or directing people to the Moose Loop. I mean, it kind of all needs to be a complete system. So I would view plan as basically like laying out the parameters, what the discipline, what's where, kind of looking at both the consistency of when a pedestrian is walking on the trail versus who's walking on the sidewalk. Should they have different wayfinding systems at those two locations, or should it all be integrated? So
I would recommend a separate plan. I've been wanting to start a wayfinding funding for the tip, but it's been hard since all the funding was used up for everything else all the time. But just beware, if you put in a plan in here and AMAX will fund it, then it won't include the Girdwood area. So just kind of keep that in mind if a wayfinding plan comes about in the future that it limits of AMAX funding.
yeah. So I think it needs to happen, whether it's AMAS funded or some other funding. Yeah.
This does say throughout the items.
Is there a way to search for a project, I mean, a road name like Spruce?
on this,
Uh-huh.
I think you could just use like Control F. I guess not on an iPad, but.
Probably not, but I don't have a mouse, but.
If you're on,
There it is.
Yeah,
scroll up,
I was like, I want to go backwards. Because there's been a lot of questions from the community and I said, hey,
Click on
Spruce.
that. And
Yeah.
so if you
Oh.
go up to the top
Uh-huh.
and the little bar at the top comes, you hit the search,
Oh,
and then you can search for anything you want.
okay, thank you. Not really working. Oh, maybe it means it doesn't exist. Maybe it's a 0 of 0. That's why.
So-
A wild card.
so I guess, could we add a wayfinding study into this as a?
Yeah.
Another identified.
Start for that. Great.
So could we talk about Spruce? I mean, that project I'm working on and, it has had some people who've not been in support of that road, but it has been in it's identified in the OS and HP. And we are currently working on it, so I don't know if it needs to be in here since it's a more of a near-term project that's already underway. Any comments on, should it be identified here or?
Yeah, and maybe that's just a good sort of example of just checking back in with her, sure that any near-term many projects are
Okay,
included in here.
okay. So should I get back with you on defining those if I?
Yeah,
find
if you
out?
don't mind, let's, you
Okay.
and I follow up and
Okay.
get your info on that.
Dowling.
I mean, it makes sense that whatever those things that are getting done,
Yeah,
they get listed here. Because if they're not in here, you know, we're losing.
again, that it helps provide that credibility of, we're working on it, it's, you know, to respond to the public, the NIMBYs of the area who don't want the project, but it is underway and they find someone here, it's not listed, so what are you guys doing? So it does help.
Which does bring up the question of a few other ones that had been in prior plans. You know, is the UMed extension in here? I don't remember seeing it, I'm just curious if
I believe it is, and it didn't, it's not programmed because it didn't score very well.
those controversial ones, curious where they're at.
Tend to be at the end. For line 181, they're complete streets. Project would construct a complete streets from Elmore Road to McGrath Street.
Yep.
21, so didn't make the cut. Based on the score.
So here's one on the complete street on 84 Turnigan Street. You know, we haven't given that one a lot of recent attention, but I think the Turnigan, what is that community council district?
And again,
It is Turnigan. I think once they get through Lois and they're gonna be interested in, what about Turnigan? They're gonna express, you know, more interest in that one. I think right now, you know, everybody realizes the limited limited funds, the constraints of all the funds and how much projects we can tackle at a time. So I think their attention right now is, am I saying that right? Is it Lois Droid? I think that's their focus currently, you know, high priority, but I believe once they get through that one, Turnigan is gonna be identified as needed and wanted. So that one's a $5 million one and it's in our MOA. It's on our back burner, but what do I do if it's not programmed? That one where I can say,
do
like
you think
Brad
anything's
mentioned,
gonna happen with it in the next 4 years?
probably.
I think
So
that's
then
sort of
just
the
kind of-
discussion is that,
Okay.
you know,
All right.
it's on our
That's-
list.
That's
we'll
a
come
good
back-
answer.
We'll
That's
look
fine.
back at this list and we
Again.
start over in 4
Mhm.
years.
No, that does help me because I'm like, for now, I'm like, hey, what do we do? We only have 35 million to work with. Not gonna get there yet. It is identified. I've got it on the back burner, so that's fine. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think without changing the cost constraints, so without assuming that the bonds are gonna go way up, we can't add more projects in, even if we do think they're pre-2050 projects. That's just that's sort of like what, those are the restraints that
I
we're
mean,
under.
the only thing I could say is like, if I were to eyeball that 68 million again for Arctic and say, well, that's a
Yeah.
huge chunk. Could we put Turnigan on the list at 5.6? Now, to me, that's achievable. The 68 million, like, wow, that's kind of sticker shock. Reduce that 68 and put the 5.6 into the Turnigan one. Or maybe that's another way to get it closer.
So can a project nomination include modification of an existing project? I'm still curious how a project, especially once it reaches the design phase, can be modified.
Matt, I believe if it's in the tip, we aren't touching them in terms of descriptions, because that would go through the tip process, but if it's if it's a scored project from the MTP nomination process, I believe the committees have the purview to update descriptions to make them make the most sense to committee members. With the caveat that that is changing what public, public wishes were when it was nominated, but also, getting more projects funded could also be desirable to the community. So there's, I think the committee members are sort of tasked with that give and take.
Right. So taking Melinda's example that the Arctic Trail would be a abnormally large portion of the budget for non-motorized. How could that feasibly be broken into smaller chunks? Would that require a nomination from somebody to a future tip?
So I'm focusing on the MTP process right now. I think,
Sure. But it does affect the MTP budget.
right.
Not this one, but a future budget. If we're locking in that 68 million for the entire project.
Right, so it could be beneficial to split it into multiple projects and have one of them not be programmed, for example. And that way we're still capturing that, public comment, but we are addressing the financial constraint that we are under.
But that would be handled in a future tip iteration. Is how it would most feasibly happen to modify that project. Once it's in the tip, it doesn't. It's already programmed fiscally.
Arctic project that was mentioned earlier is just an MTP project. It's not in the tip. So that one we could handle right now if there's desire. As part of this work session, that's the point of this work session, to have those discussions. But once it is in the tip, then that's separate and that has to go through the amendment process.
I think, again, it's important to remember, Matt, that these are project descriptions and not scopes. And once a project gets to development, gets to an engineering level and gets an actual scope, that scope could be part of this description and other parts not. And so until you actually have a project that's in environmental phase or in design phase and you have an actual scope, these are just planning projects. And so they can change dramatically.
I'd like to bring up a point on this project, that we had a similar project, I think, in the non-motorized list. It was like a $25 million project, and we're looking at it like, well, if we drop this one, there's these 6 other $2-3 million projects that we could actually take care of. And so then it becomes the idea of, are we allocating most bang for our buck? Is $68 million for Arctic more important than, 8 million for third and 5.6 for Turnigan,
21 for King Street. Now it's the opportunity cost of doing, of including this article of our complete street project. The opportunity cost is not doing, maybe a half a dozen other projects. So if you wanted to think about it in that perspective, does Arctic make sense in lieu of these other 6 projects?
I mean, we discussed earlier changing it to Tudor to Diamond. That would reduce the amount that's for that. The rest of it, we could section out as a separate project. Kelsey has mentioned, say not programmed in, and then we can go down to some other unique funded projects and put those into the difference. And I think that was the intent, and we would just go down from, starting below Arctic, the next ones that are muni listed, we would move those in unless somebody had a specific one that they're like, we would like to
I like
see
that.
these
That makes sense.
moved in.
I like that. The other one that I think I'd like, well, that would be a good one to discuss is Lake Otis, DeBar to Northern Lights on the complete street. That's line item 88. Shows it for 17 million. And that's if you do the full scope of full reconstruction from DeBar to Northern Lights. I recall back when, like 10 years ago, PM&E had a project that was ready to bid to revise the intersection at 20th Avenue to get better lane configurations and a signal to help out both East Ridge area and Airport Heights, I guess, anyways. That would be a smaller cost project and maybe we could fit that back in there, but I just don't know from a traffic perspective or for a planning perspective, the decision making that went away. And all I remember is part of it is Bob Kniefel retired the next day after he was gone. Somebody else was acting and said, kill the project, we don't need it. And by the way, there's gonna be a big project all the way from DeBar to Northern Lights that's gonna tackle this, so we don't need to do this now. But I don't know if there is still a need at that intersection. If there is a need at that intersection, could we at least reduce the scope from a $17 million project to like a $3 million project and scoot that back into the mix? But I don't know, I don't know what traffic's heard of that area.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard interest to do something to address that intersection.
Yeah,
Looking at it though, it's gonna be more complicated than you think because of just the way the topography is set. Just some of the things that it has there, the proximity of the houses and so is
But I had a
it one that would be?
I had a design already ready to go, send down to, there was no big acquisition. It was just a little bit of, maybe some minor PUEs with a signal and some lane shifting that addressed that intersection. I don't know.
Okay, well, I wasn't thinking about
Yeah.
that, so
Yeah,
I mean, if you've got a solution, then I think.
but I don't know, Chelsea, you live in that area and you see it, maybe it's functioning fine, I don't know, but from the East Ridge, it's kind of a weird configuration where everybody has to kind of wait for the left turn to do their, I guess it's the people who are trying to turn left, it's a left through lane, so it does clog up traffic there. I think the people who live in East Ridge and the people who are trying to go straight on Northern Lights, on Lake Otis, feel impacted by having to wait for the left turners. So anyways, I'm familiar with that because I was involved in it again a decade ago. It got shelved, thinking that this other bigger project was coming along.
I can tell
don't
you
know.
it is a issue to this day, and many residents will avoid making a left turn from Lake Otis onto Sitka just to be less accident prone, because people coming behind them don't necessarily anticipate that.
So
It's my
maybe
2
we
cents.
could, yeah, maybe we could like reduce the scope to make an improvement. It'd be a lower cost. And again, that could maybe fit back into this ones that we chop and reduce down from that 68 million.
I mean, my only question is, would you need to look at see what impact that would have on the rest of Lake Otis? In that portion, to see if it would impact any other, and maybe that's why it was pulled back, so they could do the whole thing at once and solve everything in that area. But if you want to move forward with that, I would recommend we don't rescope it. We add in a new project that's just for that one.
Okay,
And leave this one in here, so we can at least keep record that this was
Yeah.
nominated by the public.
okay,
Because, you know, and then you could even, you know, if you do that, and you could kind of maybe take that portion that says, look at constructing left turn lane from 20th as the East Ridge area, if that's what you're talking about. You could
with a
move that out.
signal, and it has to, have, you know, some new signal replacement probably.
Yeah, and you could move that and make the new project.
Okay. So what would we do? Just like write an 88A or? Like you guys keep track of how to insert a project?
I mean, I guess it depends on how the rest of the committees feel, if that's a project you want to move forward on or not.
I'm not sure. What have you heard from traffic
So
side?
what I would be interested in is have you send that to my signal staff, to me and
Okay.
Eric, and we can take a look and see,
If it's still needed?
yeah.
And then I
and
defer to,
how it fits in.
I do, I defer to traffic because I don't know, just, it got
Because
full.
we're aware of some of the concerns there, but
Yeah,
we're also aware that there's some high costs, some challenges. So if it addresses all of those, then I mean, we would be open to supporting you submit it. And probably just submit it to Aaron and Chelsea, right? And then it could get added as an item.
okay.
We'll get them later.
I'll dig up some of my past history on that.
So some of the other MOA projects on here that are after Arctic, should Arctic get reduced? Are Third Avenue, Brookgrouse Street to Pine Street, is item 81. So that one, you know, could use some of that money. Right? I'm not familiar with that as a project, but that could be one of the MOAs. And Turnigan Street kind of then is one of the next MOA projects that could potentially use that. And then also the Lake Otis kind of comes into play there too. King Street. King Street might be a little bit too big, but I don't know. Let's do some of those. Do any of those like sound like, yeah, we would want those to replace some of that Arctic funding.
Which was, well, what was, I was looking at my list again here.
81, item 85, 81, line 84, 86.
Yeah, like they said, they'll just click up those MOAs, see what'll fit. I mean, and I'll leave it up to you guys on how much do you chop off of the 68. I don't know. Maybe 30 million of it. It just would be nice, like James mentioned.
I guess the question is, if you provided Lake Otis 20th, how would it score? Like, where would it slot in? Would you like me to scoring process for new projects? That's just,
I think if it's committee input, that's what we would list it as, in terms of the source document.
Yeah, check with your staff because they know the history. Eric was still here back when that changed.
Fireweed, very top. Did we amend that language to say change fireweed to a max? 3 lanes?
so I think the tip was getting amended with the description, right?
Yeah, it should be whatever is in the tip right now.
This goes back to that old language, changing fireweed from 4 lanes to 3 lanes to with a center turn lane. I thought we said that was overly prescriptive for the project, when we wanted it to be to a maximum.
We did,
I think that's part of the.
I think that's part of the amendment number one. So we'll have
It's just
to,
not finalized yet.
it's not finalized. So whatever is gonna be finalized as part of the tip amendment one, to make sure we get in here. Because there was, and I heard Todd mention earlier about another sewer highway project. The STIP also had some description changes for projects that are in the tip for the NHS. So we'll get all those addressed as part of the tip amendment.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Most recent approved documents.
Another one question that I have is, I saw, we were talking about Gamble earlier. Item 80, line 80. And to the, the 3-lane boulevard with separated non-motorized facilities. I noticed that item 70 has Ingra, kind of the same thing. And those are pretty comparable costs. That's line 70. I was actually talking with Scott Thomas a little bit about Ingra Gamble and the PEL and thinking about kind of those roads. And I remember that there was a study that was done on Gamble, and Scott Thomas kind of concurred that current traffic volumes really Gamble, if you took out travel lane, could accommodate it with the volumes that it has. And it seemed like Ingra, and looking at the volumes online too, has a little bit higher volume. So I'm curious, looking at those two, this one's forward higher versus the Gamble. But part of me is like, from that discussion with Scott, wondering about knowing that there's the study that looks at reduction and a little bit lower volumes, the thought of switching Ingra and Gamble. Do you have thoughts on the DOT? And if one of them is in here as doing something like this, would you have preferences to one or the other?
A lot of this is in line with the discussions we're having with the PPL in that area, because this whole area is kind of key to whatever alternatives are going to come out of that. So I didn't capture that Ingra there is programmed while Gamble is not, and I've heard similar discussions with Scott too. So I know I hate to have a big project underway when the planning determination or so the study is going to come out and they can split with this.
Do you have a sense for what the study is saying? Is it Ingra or Gamble? Do you have, or is it still so much up in the air that's not out?
I think we're still up in the air at that. Good at stakeholder meeting. Week, I think was some of those discussions, some of the discussions with the project, and we sent that back. So there's it's a hot topic right now. I don't think we can continue the way I'm talking anything. You've been in a lot of those discussions as well.
Yeah, so I'll leave it pretty generic, but basically what we told the consultant is you have to look at projects that DOT has already initiated, i.e. the Midtown Pell. We've initiated 3 of those projects. And as you're coming down Fireweed into 20th, that's 3 lanes of high-speed traffic coming in there. You can't change from 20th on. That doesn't address what's going on the other end. And the other thing I'll remind everybody that I know we call it Ingra and Gamble Street, but that's the interstate highway system. And there are very limited, a lot of limitations that you can do to the interstate highway system as it is today. Now, if that changes, then you can do whatever you want to.
Interesting.
And that's kind of what the study's looking at. And those are the directions we gave the Pell studies, like, hey, look, this is interstate right now. It needs to be interstate unless you provide alternatives. And then at that point, yeah, they can become anything you want them.
I'd actually recommend we not include either in here, because it's kind of presupposing what is gonna come out of the PEL. We did that with Midtown congestion relief as well. When it was being worked on, it's not included stuff based on it. So I would recommend that the Ingra one be not programmed in at this point.
Chelsea, is there isn't a significant change. The Ingra Gamble corridor included in the model. In the model that the MTP, correct? It's basically.
Depending on what this project looks like.
But so
we're not really considering right now, I don't think, because there's really not a lot on this project list for that. Except for, there's really not a lot of consideration, but in 4 years, when we do have a Pell completed and we do have some direction, I think it would be much more appropriate to be considering major changes in this corridor.
So I personally am interested to see what the model says. If Gamble Street or the Ingress Street was downline. Not to say that that means that it ends up in the final plan, but I would be, I mean, if we take them both out and we don't know.
I mean, as an academic exercise, it does sound like it is really interesting, but as a tool, planning potential changes to the system, not sure that including that is entirely appropriate, but that's just.
And I will mention that in the non-motorized list, line 18 is constructing pedestrian infrastructure on Kimball and Inger Streets from East 16th to East 3rd. And that is the third nominated project to get programmed.
Which one?
Line 18 on the non-motorized list. So if we did take out both from the complete streets project list, there would still be potentially, you know, so they're concerned about seeing what the model does, that there would be a little.
I mean, really, the AMAX model should be used to see what happens to the network if you remove a lane. That really should be the model that's part of the PEL, because it's more fine-tuned for the area. So, and the AMAX model has a very limited number of runs. And so I just kind of want to preface that for people to be like, I want to see what this project does. No, that's not really what we're going to be doing.
So with this one on 18 on the non-motorized, is there something on here about the utility undergrounding? Does that pertain to this?
There's a second project that has, I think,
It's an HSIP project. It's already.
on Gamble Street.
Yeah, and so would this one address that at all? Item number 17 on the non-motorized project will construct infrastructure. Oh, just mind that. Oh, no, I'm looking at the one above, sorry. Project will construct pedestrian infrastructure on Gamble and Ingress Streets from East 16th to East 3rd. You know, they're gonna have to construct some pedestrian infrastructure after they leave the utility poles. Is that separate from the PAL? Is that?
I think I saw the Gamble one.
So the HSIP is undergrounding the utilities on Gamble already, and so it'll be undergrounding it. I don't know if it's gonna be in the roadway or underneath the non-motorized facilities, but it's not changing the non-motorized facilities that exist.
Right.
That's part of that project.
Street 40. Street 40. And now. That'll include what they gotta do, fixing what was there.
Down the street, 34.
Right, but to Aaron's point, that may or may not be changing the pedestrian infrastructure. It would just be replacing the existing infrastructure, whereas this proposal for non-motorized project, I believe, would be the intention to change that infrastructure.
And again, you know, we here fighting this out for 4 years. It's including us from reconsidering these projects.
You know, I'd like to propose instead of add protected bike lanes because of what we might be up against with all the other physical and right-of-way constraints and maintenance, depending on what type of bike lane, protected bike lane is, to either soften it or make it more generic to consider protected bike lanes or just.
For which one?
Where was I? I did see it on one of them just recently, where it was like at 97. I think it was on 100th Avenue in Victor, like at 105. I mean, I'm talking about for most of these, I mean, unless it's so wide that you have a big wide corridor to play with. You don't have a big wide corridor to play with. It's, to be able to maintain it in the winter sets us up for, you know, real challenges. I know the constituents really want to see that. If the word is get it in there, I just have to, explain when you have strong language of add, and then that becomes you need to do this. As an implementer, I may not be able to figure out how to do that and have all the different stakeholders' needs addressed to be able to maintain a facility.
So, point taken, Melinda, I think, that project specifically is currently not programmed. So that
Okay,
project isn't gonna be included at
Okay.
this point.
but just
unless stuff
to
gets
do a
shuffled
word
around.
search throughout, I don't know.
I mean, I kind of disagree, because I think it's important to keep that information available in the MTP, because you have to remember that we take MTP and then put it into the TIP, CIP, or STIP. So you further refine when you actually get into those documents. And I think it's helpful to have the information, because what we've done in the past, we've done that very thing, where we said, okay, let's remove the protected bike lane and just put non-motorized facilities. And then the question always comes later when we're doing TIP, well, what kind of non-motorized facility do we want to do here? And everyone's like, I don't really remember what was supposed to be here. So I think it's important to keep at the MTP level, kind of what we hear from people. And then when we get to the TIP level, we'll say, okay, we recognize we may not be able to do protected bike lanes here, so let's make it a more
There's
generic.
further vetting that
Yes.
happens.
Yes, this doesn't go immediately
Okay,
there.
and that's,
Exactly what's in the MTP is exactly what's in the TIP when we get to that point. There's kind of there's a flexible period there. for
Okay.
us.
in hearing that, that's better, because at least from what Brad and I experienced on Spinard and interacting in that Minnesota intersection, we had to go back and edit.
Was that the tip then?
That was the tip.
Oh, yeah, so.
So if this is more
This is that question of
and I have more
question.
flexibility, I'm fine with it, but other than that, if I would be, constrained to, hey, you gotta do this, then, that there may be real challenges.
I will just flag that it's 11:52. We
Okay.
have you all booked until noon, so staff is available, or I am at least available, but I'm sure you all have. This is Scott's. And happy to follow up with individual meetings too, if that's helpful.
So, sounds like Melinda and probably Carrie looked at it.
Yeah.
Do you like give the rest of us another day or two, or how much time do you
How much time?
want to give us to more thoroughly review this and if anything else?
Yeah, again, the sooner the better. We,
That's a very vague.
yeah, is a week enough time?
Yeah,
Say, end of the week. We need to get.
you
this
really
moving.
do need to get.
Yeah.
They end of like Friday,
Okay.
Okay,
end of the day Friday. you have
Okay.
more Comments in.
got it. All right. Thanks for entertaining all my questions, everybody, so.
Yeah. That's what this is for.
Okay.
Good job.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Nice work, everybody.
Yeah, everyone. That'll be, because whatever, we put in the tip, we better.